2D sprites and sprite sheets using Playmaker in Unity 3D. Let's go ahead and set ourselves up to start talking about what sprites are, how to apply them, what sort of objects you'd use, and all that good stuff. The first thing I have set up here is I've got a base version of Unity 4, and I have a brand new project set up, and I have Playmaker installed. So that's all you need to get started. Let's first make a cube so that we can have something to look at as we set up our camera. So there I put it at world center. I'm going to move my main camera down to 0 on the Y, so that way I'm looking right at my cube, just square on, you can see. And if you enjoy this blue background, by all means, feel free to keep it. I like to set it to something a little more neutral if I'm going to be staring at it for a while. And next we want to set the camera from perspective to orthographic projection. And that flattens out the view. Now, if you want to know a lot more about cameras, check the Hutong channel right here. There is a whole series on camera motion and control, and I talk a lot about sizing in that. And I will talk a little more about sizing as we go, but for now, let's just set this to 1 so we can actually see our cube as we work. And not real important, but I'm going to bring the clipping plane in just so I've got a little bit smaller numbers there to work with. Okay, now we are set up. One more thing. Notice how this cube is really dark. See, here it's gray, here it's like almost black. If you come into Edit Render Settings and look under Ambient Light, right here, if you've never seen this before, if you add a color, it's actually applying the color to how it renders the objects. I don't want any of that, so I'm just going to set it to white. This makes sure I don't have any surprises along the way as I work and end up with something colored a little bit that I don't really realize why it's happening. Also, as we work, we're going to use materials that just don't pay attention to light, and that is a second way to completely get rid of the problem. But I think it's good to set this as well so that you don't have any surprises along the way as you go. We make sprites, essentially they are just textures, right, that we would apply to something, and then that would be our game. Let me show you, just as a quick example, I've got a bunch of really nice free art that I found online at vickywenderlich.com. There's a bunch of free art for this kind of frog and lily pad sort of game. I've got some nice objects here that we're going to start working with. And because it's free, you can go download it as well and work through these as I do, if you'd like. And it's not just this game. There's actually a whole bunch of free art up there. So if you want some stuff to kickstart you, get you going. If you want some prototype art, it's up there. And there's actually been lots of games made with free art. Don't feel ashamed. If you're not an artist, don't let it hold you back. Make a great game. Go, right? So once again, go check that out. And these will be the examples I'm using. So let's say I want to put this lily pad texture. You can see it's just a 128 by 128 72 dpi texture PNG file. And I could bring it into my scene by just dragging it in. I could just drag it on the cube. But, you know, I don't know about you, but that's not good enough for me. I don't want that in my game. It's just chunky and it looks weird and I got the white around it. And also this is a cube object. I just need the one, see I can just see the one face? That's all I need. I don't need all this other stuff back there. So really, I don't want a cube. What I want is a plane, right? So what if I got rid of my cube and I went and made a plane? Well, there's a problem here too. You can see right away that look at all that geometry. Here, let me zoom in. I mean, look at that. That is just way too much. That's great if you're starting out with, you're going to make a terrain or something. There's really good uses for this, but don't use this for your sprites. There's just way too much art on there. Even if you drag that up, not art, polygons. You just don't need that much. You just need one polygon, really. So once again, let's just get rid of that. And the solution, obviously, because that's it. There's nothing else in here that's even, like a cylinder or whatever. We're going to go make our own plane in another program. So I have a 3D program called Silo. I also use Maya a lot. I've used 3D Studio Max. Honestly, any 3D program is going to do this. We're just making a polygon, right? It's not a big deal. And there's some very capable ones out there. So use the one you have, Don't worry about that. And I'm going to create It's called a grid in Silo, but it might be called a plane or a poly or something like that. And there I've got, look at that, one polygon. And you may have the option, a lot of these 3D programs have the option here to come in and choose width and depth and how many sections. You just want one. You want a 1 square unit, so it'll match the size of your Maya file, and we'll probably want to customize this for other reasons later. And you just want one polygon or one section for each thing. Okay, so that's all you need to do for creating it. But let's talk about orientation, because I have this texture here, and it's just a simple little mapping reference I've created. Just says top and bottom, and that's so I can tell whether or not it's actually lining up. But how do I know what the top is, actually? Right? What's the top of a plane? Do you know? Maybe you do. What we have to do is go by Unity's reference, and this gets really important. Let's switch back to Unity, and there we go. We want to, let's bring that cube back. Our old friend the cube, really useful. It has, Unity has a concept of forward and up, right? And forward is the Z positive, which is this blue axis. And Y, up, is this green axis. And that's represented also here in this camera. You can see both of these objects, right? Z forward is what the camera is looking down. And you can't tell because the cube is not in the view, but there we go. If we bring it in, right? Up, down, left, right. And of course in orthographic mode, Z is just for sorting essentially. It doesn't make it larger or smaller. So we need to match this. And there's a couple of thoughts, because you can work in a flat view like I have here, where we're talking about the X and the Y axis being up, down, left, right. But if you want to use some of these, there's some Playmaker functions. They actually built on code in Unity around look. If you want to use some of these things for like mouse look and iTween look to and all of these, essentially, do a look at, it assumes, right? Because remember I said there's a concept of forward and up. Most of these under the hood assume that up is this y-axis, all right? So if you try to tell something this is like left, right, you know, I'm just doing a X, Y, 2D. Well, what's up in that case? To you, it's Y, but it's going to rotate your object in all kinds of strange ways, and I'll have some examples of that. So it is also perfectly valid if you think, say you're going to do a tower defense type game and you want a tower that's always looking at, you know, say you had an enemy up here and a tower here and you wanted it to follow the motion around. It's perfectly valid if you want to use these to change the camera. And let's just rotate it along its X by 90 degrees. I'll go ahead and make that numerical. And then I can raise it up. I can put this anywhere I want, right? Let's go ahead and... It all works as long as you stick to something. Let me just put it at world center, for instance, and then I can raise it up. And then if this comes back to world center, whoops, crazy clicks. Then there you see I've got my cube back in view, and it looks just like it did before, except now I'm looking straight down, right, instead of straight forward. And what that allows you to do is then use some of these look functions to rotate around. So kind of getting ahead of myself, but it's really important for you to think about, do you want to work straight down or straight forward? Both are completely legit, and so are looking from other sides. You may have all kinds of different reasons why you may want to line something up in any of these axes. But that's what I would suggest, is either going a Z forward or a Z down. So let's assume for a minute, and since we're in this position, let's just keep it. Let's just say we're going to use, we're going to look down the Y, and this is going to be, we're going to work in Z and X, in other words. So Z is going to be up and down, X is still going to be back and forth, and Y is going to be up, which will be forward and away from the camera. So we need to set up our polygon over here in Silo to have this same sort of orientation so that it will do something we expect it to do. All right, let's go ahead and look at Silo again. So Z forward, now one thing you'll notice right away, Some programs are like this. Z points forward, the x-axis goes left, x positive, z positive goes forward, and y positive goes up. Unity, on the other hand, it's the same z forward axis, the same y positive up axis, but the x positive goes in the other direction. A lot of 3D programs might be flipped like this. Not a big deal because Unity will flip that around for us. So don't let that hang you up. Let's work off the forward and up. All right, so this is upside down, essentially. It's facing exactly the opposite of what I want. So I'm going to come into my UV editing window, make sure I've got, make sure I've got the face selected here. And I should be able to rotate it 180 degrees. And now I've just flipped the UVs, the UV polygon around so that it left the geometry exactly where it is. It just rotated how the texture is displayed. And you can see that it's, I don't have it flipped inverted. Sometimes you might have an inverted set of UVs here too, but that's not the case because the letters read appropriately. So that is all I need to start out with this. Let me go ahead and name what I got here. I've got a few from examples, I think. So let me choose this grid and call it Poly 1 by 1. And we know that Z forward is good. All right, I will, with that selected, I will export the selected objects or save selected objects. And that lets me come into this area here, and let's go ahead and make a new objects folder for me to store some stuff in. And I'm going to export it as an OBJ file. This is a file type that goes back a long way through several different programs. But OBJ is a simple, very simple file. It's basically a text file, and all it does is hold, let's see if we can, well, all it does is hold the information for the positions of the UVs and the vertices. So it's nice and light. It doesn't have any weird export features. It doesn't carry animation, nothing like that. So nice and easy to use. All right, let's go back to Unity and we will import that. So I'll just drag that in, and you get a material file by export too. We don't need that at all. I'm just going to drop that in. Oops. Drag and drop that in. I did it twice, so delete that. And in the sake of being clean, I want to create a objects folder and a textures folder. Okay, there's that. And if we bring that into the scene, there we go. Let's get rid of this cube because it's kind of in the way. And look at that. It looks the same, right? Nice and square. And once more, just to make sure we got it lined up, let's bring in a cube. And we do indeed. Look at that. See, it flipped the x-axis for us, so we're good to go. So everything looks real good. Let's get rid of that. What we need now is just a texture or a material. So let's create a new, it's just off your screen there, create new material. And I'm going to call this Lily Pad Orange Matte for material. And I can drag that on, and I can load that onto the mesh. And look at that. There we go. We've got a texture. So we're kind of back to where we were in the first place, but we've got much lighter geometry. And because we've made this, we can use this same object over and over and over, right? For instance, if I bring in a second one, just pull that off to the side. Let's get them both onto the screen there. And I could go back to one of these other, let's see, where's my frog folder? So I've got other colored lily pads too, so I wanted to bring in one of these, right? And I could make another texture. Let's just duplicate that one. Call it green. I think it was green, wasn't it? Something like that. And then I could apply, I forget which one it was. Whoops, wrong one. So we'll just put that one back on. So I could have green and an orange one. But They're not transparent, right? We've got lots of different materials and lots of different colors, and just kind of gets to be a mess. The good thing is we can just keep reusing this same polygon object over and over. We can make prefabs out of it, and in fact, we're going to. But this texturing thing isn't going to work, because what if I want to animate? What if I have a character and I want to animate them? Or what if I wanted this to change from green to orange, depending on some conditions? Then you have to do a swap texture, a swap material, and it just gets weird. So what we want to do is make a sprite sheet. And a sprite sheet is a big image, like one big texture, just like, you know, these are textures, but it's got all kinds of little textures lined up inside of it, and we can just use the one part of that one texture for all these different objects. I know maybe it sounds crazy if you haven't used one, but we're going to make one together right now, and I'm going to show you that they're not that crazy of a deal. Let's go ahead and move over to a program I'm using called Texture Packer. And this is just a brand new empty texture here. And I can drag some objects in. And if we go back to, here's my pile of files, we can go ahead and drag them into this sprites column. And what I've got is all these lily pads that we've seen. I'll just throw those in there. And you can see as I do, it's building this one kind of combined texture as I go. I have a fly, right? So right there, I can throw that guy on there. I have a rock. These are all out of that free texture set. And I think that's all I'm going to want right now. That's probably good to get us started. So we'll go ahead and use those. I'll get that out of the way. And you can see it's combined them. It's kind of put them all together and packed them up. And there's not a lot of empty space between them. It's basically found the maximum size that this thing needs and packed them together. And oftentimes, this is what you want, because you're maximizing your texture usage, meaning you're wasting as little of this space as possible. And this was really important, like on a mobile device, really important back in like the early console days. In fact, still is today on consoles, even on the big ones, when you're doing really large games with tons and tons of textures. But what we're going to do today is kind of make it not optimized, so that we can have a really regular laid out grid of images, and that will allow us to work with these things really, really easily. Now on a modern PC, really not an issue to waste a little bit of texture space. Really isn't. If you're doing mobile games, you want to start being more careful about this, and this is where some of those third-party options will come in. They just do this fantastic job of packing textures and letting you use them dynamically. But straight up, if you're just prototyping, if you're making a game for PC, if you're making a more simple game, not going to be a problem doing this at all. So let's step through this one by one, and I'll show you how it works. I'll set this to Unity 3D. I'm not actually going to use the file it outputs, but I like to have it be accurate anyway. Basically, in an app like this, if you don't know what something does, just leave it alone. Just don't touch it, and you'll be okay. You can set a maximum size here, so that like it can change the layout, but you see it's not real responsive to what I'm doing. There it is. If I get a little smaller, I want a little more control, so I'm going to force it to 512 by 512 as a fixed size. See, now I've got a 512 by 512. Let me zoom back out a little bit. So I've got a sheet that's exactly 512 by 512. So go down a little more. The algorithm doesn't make any sense until you look up what it does. Basically means, how do I lay things out? So here it's doing, really packing it in nice and tight. What I want to do is go by name. So basic name. And what that's now done is, you see, I've labeled like 1 lily pad and 2 fly, and that's so that it shows up on different lines, right? And I'm going to do this in ascending. Now, you might be asking, how do I know that I got these all packed in? Well, it's because I have set up each of these files. If I open one, once again, if you look at it, it's 128 by 128 pixels at 72 pixels per inch. These were a little bit different. If I look at the original ones, you may not get something that's exactly the size you want. So here, let me bring this up, and I'll show you the original file. It was in the iPad section. And so all these lily pads are the same. So lily pad orange, it was a little bigger, right? It was 228 by 224 at 72 pixels per inch. And I knew that I wanted something very, very regular, being exactly 128 by 128, so that I could build, because 128 times 4 is 512, right? So what I did is I just scaled it really quick, each of these images. So I'll open it up in Pixelmator. You can use Photoshop. You can use whatever you want. Shows me the width and height. Right? I can use image size. And what I want to do is 72 dpi is good. If you scale up to say 256 by 256, then I'm stretching the image and that doesn't look good. Plus I didn't need it anywhere near that big. So turn off scale proportionate. I set it to 128 by 128 and then scaled it down. So now I've got a perfectly square image, okay, and it's the size I want. So I just went through and did that for each one of these. Feel free to set these up for whatever size you may need in your game if you're following along. But that's how you know. I went through for every one of these. Same with the rock, right? It's the original is what was it at? Well, this is 256 by 240, so it was much larger even than the other one. So I went in and made them all this one regular size. Let me pull that out of the way again. And that's so I can get this perfect grid. It doesn't look quite perfect yet, right? Because I'm getting some padding. I'll get rid of that. And here we're trimming off the unused space. I'm going to say none. And look, now I've got this perfectly regular, squared up image. Okay. So if you think about it, these are the images. And it makes a lot of sense because they're perfectly squared. And why did I do this instead of, say, something like that? This is valid too, as long as you're using a power of 2, which means you want to always stick to, you know, those numbers you've seen everywhere, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024, and 2048, and on and on. Basically, the number doubles every time. And I won't go into the math of this. If you're interested, there's some great articles on the web. But essentially, if you use a power of 2, it makes video cards and compression algorithms and all these other things that work behind the scenes just work better. They work better and faster. So you want to really stick to a power of 2 size. I know that later on, I'm probably going to want to put in 2 more rows of stuff because, I mean, these are cool, but this isn't enough. I'm going to want more for my game, right? So I'll do this now. I can set it up and use it, and I can come in later, add more images, and re-export it. So that's why I'm making it 512 by 512 now. So seem to make sense? Now I've made my sprite sheet. I'm going to go ahead and save the file in case I need to come back to this. And it will let me, I'll just make a new desktop folder, and I'll call this example sprite sheets. That should be all right. And then I'll save that file right in there. So I've saved the file, but not the export of the image I want, right? I've just saved the file for this program. So I'll go ahead and press publish, and you can choose what output you want. I'm going to leave it on PNG. So I choose publish. These little things always scare me, but there are actually no errors. We're good. And close that. And if I look at, let me open that folder, for example, sprite sheets. And here we go. Look at PNG, and look at that. It's output this nice little texture that we can use. Okay, super easy and cool. So let me switch back to Unity. There we go. And once again, I'll just drag that onto my textures. Get that out of the way. And what do we call it? Tower test sheet. That's, how about we call this frog sprite sheet? That makes sense because it's like froggy stuff with the frog game things. So makes sense. We'll create another material. Okay, we'll call it frog sprite sheet matte. I'll add that in. And now we've got the texture on it. I will apply this to one of our lucky planes. And look, not quite what we were after yet, is it? Because instead of this one image, we've got all of them. And that seems weird. And we still haven't got our transparency out. Well, let's deal with that transparency first. I don't know if you've taken a stroll here through, there's things popping up off the window, but there are a ton of textures in here. And you may want to write or purchase or create your own, but out of the gate, I'm going to use unlit transparent. Because what that does, see, punches out the transparency for these sprites. So we're not getting any of those transparencies, which is really cool. And unlit, that should be a key. Like I mentioned earlier, we're just going to ignore lighting. We're not going to do anything about it. And if I went in and fiddled with that whole render settings thing again, it wouldn't be picking up that. So there you go. Unlit, transparent. That'll give it to you right away. And we're kind of getting this for free because remember our old friend Texture Packer? it made, it embedded the information we need in order to clean that out. So good stuff. Between these two programs, it's just handling it for us. Now you could totally, let me just take an aside, you could totally go into something like Photoshop or Pixelmator and just make one of these by hand, right? Make yourself an alpha channel or a matte color. You could totally make this by hand. You don't have to use something like this. It's just, you know, a little more work. If you're into that, if you're good at that, go for it. Okay, now let's get down to it and finish this thing off and apply it so we see just one of these, like say just this orange one again over here. There's a few ways we can go about this. First of all, we should have a little talk about tiling. And tiling is how many times is this image going to tile over, over this polygon, over this geometry. If I change this to 2, for instance, we're now seeing it twice, right? It's tiled, well, here we are, tiling twice in the x, so it's duplicated, and once in the y. If we made it 4 in the y, for instance, we get 4 of them vertically and only 2 horizontally. So that should make sense. I think you guys have tiled stuff before. But you can go backwards too, right? Just to point it out, -5 and -5 will give me half of it. And right now what we're seeing is one of this blank half. So that's why nothing's visible right there. So tiling is kind of important for how you lay this out. Remember, we have a grid of 4 by 4, so we have 4 even units in each direction. So if I were to take my frog sprite sheet and change the tiling to be 0.25, right? Because it's a quarter of 1 is 0.25, right? Follow me on that math. 0.25 and 0.25. Now again, we're in a black spot here, so let's say 0.75. There we go. Now we're seeing the fly, right? So you can choose what you want. Like if I wanted to move over instead of 0.25, what if I went up? So 0.5 would be halfway in. Now I'm indexing. Well, I've got a little bit of thing going on there. 2.5. See how this works? If I offset, I'm seeing different amounts of the image. Okay, if that was 0.75 as well, now I'm going to be seeing 3/4 of the image. So there it is. So it would, you could see a little more if I had the whole image filled, but essentially we know we want to do 0.25 by 0.25 so that we only see one of these objects at a time, because that's a quarter vertically and a quarter of it horizontally. But how do I move it around on here, right? Because clearly I've set it to a quarter, but I'm not seeing the section I want. So I can use offset. And again, let's just work in quarters. So if I start offsetting by a quarter, am I going to get where I'm at? How about we try the other direction, 0.75. There we go. And you ask why is this working this way? Well, the corner, right, it's working from down here in the lower left corner as 0 and working its way up in this direction. So it's used to, because remember, UVs work in one direction and kind of image maps work in another direction. So you might have to kind of go backwards. I think you could also say -0.25. See, if you start at the back by saying negative essentially and index your way in. So it's just up to you how you feel comfortable. But, you know, play with the numbers. You'll find it. You'll definitely find what you want. Oop, I have negative. I'll get rid of the comma. How about if I type right? There we go. So that, right, because I've gone in by a quarter and I've come in by a quarter, by 3/4, and that gets me up to here. So you can adjust the offset. Where we go? Material. You can adjust the offset of your material in order to get yourself there. And watch this. If I then apply the same material to the other plane, I've got the same thing on both of them. Okay, pretty cool. But what if I wanted something else? You know, what if I wanted this one, this green one instead? I've moved over from the orange to the green. Well, they both change. Well, that's a pain, right? That's great if I'm animating. That's exactly what I want, is to be able to step through these and animate. And in fact, that's exactly what we're going to do, is use Playmaker to step through some of these for us. But what if I want different lily pads that all share the same texture? Well, here we go. Maybe this solution isn't going to work quite as well as something else that's really easy that we can do right back in Silo. So let's go back there. Remember this? Let's now change our texture. If I go in and find where did we save our texture? Oh, we saved it to the desktop. That's right. To example sprite sheet, and there it is. So I'll open that up, and now I've got my reference texture right here on my polygon, so I can see what I'm doing. And you can do this numerically, which I really recommend you kind of do precisely, but you can also adjust the UVs. So if I choose, I'm a little twitchy on my mouse today, so if I choose face, and I just use these tools, I could scale in, right? See there, I'm going numerically. I'm going to undo that because I know I want to be 0.25, okay, on the X, and then 0.25 on the Y. So now I've got exactly a quarter, just like we did when we offset in Unity. And I'm going to go ahead and pull that up. This is where, let's just zoom in. Right, so I pull up and I get, and this is where I'm saying you can be numerically precise or you can feel it in. It just depends on if you need your objects to stack well or if you want to make a little bit of adjustments. But there we go. And see now, let me go back and show you what I did. As I move this, whatever this UV polygon is over is going to be what gets displayed. Okay, so I can line that up. I'm just going to do it by feel right now for the sake of speed and getting this done. So I've lined that up, I've adjusted that UV, and now I'm going to rename this. Same polygon I had before. Call this Lily Orange. And then I will save selected object. Here to my object folder, that's good. Whoops, I think that's a different object folder actually. Yes, it is. Nope, that's good. So let's call this one Lily Orange. Save it out, switch back to Unity really quickly. If I look in that folder, go back, dun, 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 objects. Here it is, Lily Orange. I'll drag that into my objects. So this is exactly, you get materials by default, and I just get rid of those because I don't need them. I've got a new polygon. It's exactly the same as the other one, except for the mapping, right? And there we go. So I'll bring that one in, and I can drop this one frog sprite sheet. Oh, first let's fix this. Let's set it back to no offset by no offset and tiling of 1 by 1 so that the sheet is just what the sheet is. And then I drop it on the lily pad orange. Look at that. I've mapped it exactly to what I need. Then one more quick example to just show you how this comes through. Now I'll come back into Silo and say I want this one here. I want the yellow one, for instance, this time. I'll come down here and line that up. Looks good. And let me just change this to yellow. Once again, export selected object. Dun, 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 Lily Orange. We'll change that to yellow. Save it. Back to Unity. Back to this. There's our object. And one more time, Lily Yellow. Let me drag that in. Make a little space for it. Get those over. And let's just bring them all down a little bit so they fit better in the view. Okay, so now Lily Orange, and we're going to use the same frog sprite sheet material and drop it on. But look at that, this time it's yellow. So if you map something directly, right, if you map the UV polygons directly, you can set yourself up for some of these simple things. And what's cool is if you look at your stats, you're going to be getting one draw call per material. Okay, if I used a different material and set up, remember when I was fiddling with these numbers, we're gonna run up our draw calls when we start animating, but we can save a lot of space in memory and time for draw calls, speeding up our game if we set up individual objects like this with different UV mapping. And remember, these are one polygon. This isn't going to cost you anything, right? Super light. And we're using the same sprite sheet with the same material. So same texture. These get rendered at once. They're really easy to make, and you can have a bunch of them. You can duplicate these things. They're going to stay. Those colors, you can make one for each color. I can make one for the rock, so on and so forth. So that is how you can do some static stuff with using a sprite sheet. All right, let's move on to the next video and take a look at how we would animate sprites using Playmaker inside of Unity 3D to actually move these things around, and we're going to make our little fly flap its wings.